The woman in your life who will do what she must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you.
Hello everybody and welcome to Women's Spaces. My name is Elaine B. Holtz and I'm your host. And as always, I am so excited about today's show. I have a special guest with me by the name of Linda Sartor, who is an author, an activist, and an educator. She's written this wonderful book called Turning Fear into Power. One of my favorite subjects, turning fear into power. That's what more women need to know and understand. Well, I've been out for a while. I took the whole month of July off, and I'll tell you something, it's the best thing I could have done for myself. I went up to Klamath Falls, Oregon, and had a wonderful, wonderful time. Went on a women's retreat for women's school. My dear friend Sharon Macer, who started women's school several years ago, we decided to get together to go up to Klamath Falls and to stay at a wonderful, wonderful house and work out the world's problem to see what kind of curriculum that we want to have for the women's school. And I'm really excited about that. We're looking around December to have a very, very special musical program, and keep your fingers crossed. I mean, there's some rumor that we might even get Holly Near. I don't know yet, but it's just a rumor right now. Well, I have a lot of things to cover, and so much is going on in the world today. It's just amazing to me. I mean, I cannot believe I've been working very hard on the Andy Lopez situation. As we know, Jill Ravage made her decision, and I have to say something about that. I just can't believe in my wildest dreams that they took 94 pages, 94, to justify the killing of that young boy. He was 13 years old. He had 7 bullets put into his young body. No apology, no remorse. No statement of anything from our law enforcement, and yet they had 94 pages to justify that it was okay that Deputy Sheriff Eric Gelhaus was in his rights to kill that young boy. I don't understand it. I have to scratch my head, and I'm beginning to ask a very simple question. You know, are we a planet of love or hate? Are we a planet of life or death? I mean, I can't figure it out. You know, I look at Israel and I look at Palestine, what's happening. I mean, I'm not there, so I don't know what's going on. And that's what's wonderful about my guest. She actually went to Palestine and Israel in 2002, and she's got she'll give us a little bit of insight. Linda will give us some insight into what it's all about. But the thing that's so perplexing to me is, why are they using such force? You know, to civilians, you know, killing children. I mean, that is just preposterous to me. And what's so interesting is when I'm listening to the news, I guess there's this group called Hamas, and they're saying that they're putting forth children to get world empathy and to maybe come onto their side. Well, I don't know who's right or wrong. You know, I'm not in this world to judge anybody, but I do know one thing that is wrong in my mind, and that's killing of children. Why do I say that? I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I have my own children. I do not want that to happen. It's very interesting. There was an article in the Press Democrat, and it was just riveting to me. It came from Gaza City on the Gaza Strip. I can't believe that there's no, oh yes, it's Wajan Abu Shlamala, who was born and raised in Gaza. He wrote the article, and one of the things that he said that was so interesting to me, he interviewed a mother, and she says, the most painful question they asked me is a response to our neurotic nighttime habits. Listen to this. This is so amazing to me. One night I'll make all three of my children sleep in the same bedroom with us, hoping to increase the odds we'll survive if a shell hits one of the empty rooms in our house. But then, listen to this, then the next night she has to separate them, thinking that if I divide my children, they won't all die in the attack. Come on, guys, this is Women's Spaces. How would you feel if you had to go through that? You know, I don't know, like I said, I don't know who's right or who's wrong. The only thing we can do as women, and that is to stand up and say, no more wars. Period. You guys have to figure a way to take a time out. Remember when we were raising our kids, we said, let's take a time out. Well, let's take a time out. Let's sit down at the table and let's see if we can find a way to work this out so we can stop killing innocent children, innocent women, innocent civilians. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me. It really is. And if anybody out there is listening who believes that this conflict is okay, think about it for a moment. What is okay about killing women and children? What is the justification? I don't understand it. I do not understand it. You can give me all the logic in the world. I don't care what logic you give me when I see a young child with blood coming out of them because they were shot with bullets that were produced in this country. I say it's got to stop. Don't tell me the reason you're doing it. I don't want to hear it. I just want it to stop. Anyway, a lot to think about, but that's what Women's Spaces is all about. I don't mean to get on my soapbox, but I'll tell you, this is really eating at me. And when I talked to Linda Sartor and all the traveling she did, the same thing happened to her. Things started to eat at her. She could not handle it anymore, and she had to do something. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my guest, Linda Sartor. Linda, welcome to Women's Spaces.
Thank you, Elaine.
It's just a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Well, I want to tell my viewers a little bit about you, and also my listeners, because sometimes this goes on the radio. Linda Sartor has always been, I love that, a peace activist, a peace and justice activist, and an educator, and has been arrested a number of times protesting atrocities committed by the U.S. in her name with her tax money. Very important. These atrocities are committed in our name with our tax dollars. I mean, just think if we took those tax dollars and put them into education, my goodness, or health care. You know, they never have money for health care. That's why I say, are we a planet of life or a planet of death? You know, we need to ask ourselves that question. Anyway, Linda has been an activist, like she said, all her life, and really has been against all the nuclear activity that's going on in the planet. And in 2002, she decided she was going to do something, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, Linda, anything else that you'd like to add to let our viewers and listeners know about you?
I think that as you hear my story, that you'll get to know me better. I don't know of anything specific I could say that I want you to know before I start.
Okay, why don't we start with the story? You know, I know that you're a peace activist. You've been very active in the nuclear weapons arena and all kinds of different things. But all of a sudden, you start really getting aggravated after 9/11. Tell us what happened and what took place in your mind.
Well, actually, I was teaching in the public school system at the time, and no, wait a minute. Oh, shoot. What I was noticing through the 90s is that it looked to me like we were actually coming to a place where we were getting possibly beyond war. There had been the moratorium on testing nuclear weapons. There was the breakdown of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War. There was still fighting going on in places, but as far as the U.S. involvement, because of the ending of the Cold War, and it seemed like we might be getting to a place where we would be able to find other ways, nonviolent ways, to work together throughout the world. So when 9/11 happened, and I saw how immediately our government and people of the United States were responding to 9/11 very defensively, and again talking war immediately, and then watching what occurred over the months, seeing us bomb Afghanistan, and watching then what was happening in Israel-Palestine, my heart was tormented, and protesting, which I'd always done, and educating, which I'd been doing for many years, was not enough any longer. And I felt like I had to do something to put my body on the line, to say with my own body, with my own life, that my life as a U.S. American citizen isn't any more precious than anybody else's life in the world. And I heard about what was happening in Israel-Palestine right then. In the spring of 2002, there was the blowing up of Jenin City, or not Jenin Camp, which was a refugee camp of Palestinians. and there was all kinds of violence due to the conflict between Israel and Palestine at that time. And there was the rising of the international solidarity movement, who were standing for nonviolent protests and witness of what was going on in Israel-Palestine. And so I heard about them and immediately realized this is what I have to do. And so it was like this inner voice that was relentless, because then as soon as I made the decision that I was going to go join the international solidarity movement for just a few weeks in Israel-Palestine, then all of my resistances showed up.
Well, you know, that's so interesting. All of your resistances showed up. It's really interesting because I was looking in your book, and it's wonderful when you talk about your fears and how you overcame some of the fears. It sounded like you were suddenly paralyzed, like, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't go over there. How am I going to do it? How am I going to get the money? You know, all the things that, you know, that swirl in our mind. So tell us, what are some things that you did to help you overcome some of these fears?
Well, one of the jobs I do, and I was doing at that time also, was guiding people who are going to do a wilderness trip, which is a 3-day fast alone in the desert. So it's a very deep spiritual experience for people, and everybody has a different path that they're on, but it's deep for anyone who does this, spending 3 days alone, fasting, taking away all distractions from their lives, but also facing a lot of fears of the dark, of the animals that live in the desert that we don't know how to be with, of being alone. And so I'd witnessed many people go through the process of facing fears that are very real fears. And I've worked with people to not overcome fears, but to be with fear in a different way, so it doesn't stop us from following our hearts. So when the fears started showing up for me, I mean, I don't like to travel, much less travel alone into a war zone. And I just started talking with people. A lot of people I spoke with said, oh man, you have a lot of courage. I wouldn't do that. And asked me why I was doing it. And I was trying to connect with everyone to sort of come to completion, because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I was really willing to put my life on the line because I was seeing many people being killed in my name with our taxpayer money, and needed to do more. It was like I projected myself back to if I was in Nazi Germany, watching what was happening, would I have been able to sit still and not do anything just because I didn't know that there was anything that I could do?
You know, you bring up such a great point, Linda. I mean, a really great point. I asked myself over and over that question. You know, I'm Jewish, and I actually lost family in the Holocaust. So I understand that feeling of loss, that feeling of isolation that happened during that time. I mean, fortunately, we were in America, but I could feel from my grandmother, the loss. And she never really, to the day she died, she talked about it. But I often ask myself the question, especially when I was working with the Andy Lopez situation. I'm with the Justice Coalition for Andy Lopez. And I asked myself, I wonder if there were people just like us who were trying to change things, who were trying to do something, and nobody listened. So I think that's a very important point and a very important question to ask, because if we ask that question, then we have to answer it by saying, well, of course there was, and do we want to be the same type of people that help try to make a difference, or are we going to all become so full of fear that we don't do anything? So I really appreciate you bringing up that point. So tell us, so what happened after that? So you finally went through all your fears. You said that you guided people on Vision Quest, and you helped them face their fear, and now you were facing your fear. So what was the thing that finally put you over the top, that made it possible for you to actually finally go?
So when people are facing fears like of rattlesnakes and mountain lions when they're going to the desert for the first time and they're going to be alone there, those are real fears. They feel like they're life-threatening fears, and I can see that. But I also know enough about being around rattlesnakes and mountain lions that I can teach people how to be safe around mountain lions and rattlesnakes. And and we talk about the fears. We don't ignore them or resist them or deny them. We be with the fears, and we get into like a relationship with the fear itself and see what it has to teach us. So in seeing that how people are facing life-threatening fears, when they come to the desert, I realized, okay, this looks to me like a life-threatening fear. I'm going into a war zone, and I just let myself be with the fear. I learned as much as I could about the situation, about how people were keeping themselves safe in the situation. I thought about possible scenarios that I might go through and how I would stay safe. I thought about questions I needed to ask and who I needed to ask the questions, and then I had to trust. And my belief is that part of the process of going on a vision quest is really getting in touch with what the heart is longing for. I believe that the more each of us is able to follow our own hearts, the more safe the whole world will be, because so much of the decisions that have been made that have brought us to where we are now on the planet have been made with the thinking that comes from our mind, our head. And I think we need to start thinking with our hearts and following our hearts and being with fear that gets in the way when we're attempting to follow our hearts. And to me, that's what gives me hope for a future of the planet and of the people on the planet.
Well, I still, even though you went through the whole process, like you said, I still feel that it really took a lot of courage, particularly to go into a war zone. Okay, so now you travel to Israel. That was your first stop, your first trip. You went from United States to Israel. What happened when you got to Israel? I mean, what was your first impact or your first impression when you landed there?
Well, even before we had a full training, the idea was we were going to be trained to do the nonviolent actions that would be taking place while we were there. But what happened is the Israeli soldiers had gone into Baladi camp, a refugee camp of Palestinian refugees from 3 generations prior. So it was like a village or town, beautiful houses where people have been living now after being displaced in the 40s. We heard that the Israeli soldiers were going into this refugee camp, and that we made a quick decision. There was a team of like 16 of us that had come together in Jerusalem and made a quick decision by one of the people, or the 2 who were leading the group, the team, that we were going to go into Baladi camp.
Wait, I think what we need to do is just back up a little bit. So you were so you joined a group of people. How did that happen, and who were the people that you joined?
It was the International Solidarity Movement, and they were an organization that was committed to nonviolence. Many people from Europe and the U.S. would come to join, but it was actually Palestinians who guided the organization from there in a little village near Bethlehem. And so I connected with the International Solidarity Movement when I was still in the U.S. and found out where to meet them, and they were. Those are some of the fears that showed up. That people I was communicating with in Palestine were then all of a sudden on a speaking tour in the U.S. and I was going to be arriving and finding my way to Jerusalem when they were turning peace activists away at the airport. I had to get there on my own, and I wasn't even sure who it was I was going to be calling or who I was going to be with once I got there. And so those are some of the fears that showed up when I said to myself, well, you could still decide not to do this, but then that inner voice of my heart was relentlessly telling me I have to follow through no matter how scared I was. So I met up with the International Solidarity Movement, and 16 people ended up coming together in Jerusalem after I had arrived, and I'd been there for 2 days. And we made this decision to go as a team into Baladi camp, which was outside of Nablus in Palestine. And the soldiers had gone in the morning. We finally got there in the afternoon. We did a little bit of training in the van together as we were on our way. One of our team leaders asked, if we were willing to put our life out there, what kind of risk we were willing to take. And I spoke it out loud, that my commitment, that I came in order to show with my life that my life is not any more precious than other people's lives in the world, just because I'm a U.S. American citizen.
Oh my goodness, Linda. What a story. I mean, and what a realization. You know, I look at it that what you have come to the conclusion that we're all equal on this earth. We're all children of the planet. We all have a right to be here.
For sure.
And that you were willing, you know, it reminds me of the Battle of Algiers, you know, when the Algerian people were trying to break away from the French. Before they could do it, the final war that happened was that people were willing to go on the front line and say, hey, if I can't be free, I don't want to live anymore. I mean, I'm not suggesting people do that, but I mean, that is a very, very, very strong commitment. I mean, my hat's off to you for that. So did you stay after the 16 of you came together? Then what happened? Did you go to a family? Did you where did you stay, and how did you maneuver around? I guess you were in Palestine then.
Yes. We had got into we were on our way into Balata camp, and we had to take various forms of transportation because of roadblocks. So we were on one service, which is a taxi that took us into the outside of Nablus, and we had to hike over the hill and down into Nablus and through Nablus, and about 6 people from the group actually split off and went to the hospital because there was a need for witnessing at the Palestinian hospital in Nablus, and the rest of us, there were 11 of us at that point. One reporter from Jordan joined us as we were walking through Nablus, and we walked into Balata camp, which was on the outside of Nablus. Tanks were guarding the border of Balata camp because the soldiers had been in to arrest all of the men from ages 15 to 50 that day. Did you?
Okay, so all right. So the question that I have for you is I'm really curious about, and I think my viewers are probably at this point, here you're coming from the United States, which there's no war, and then all of a sudden you're confronted with tanks, soldiers. What did it feel like? I mean, what was the feeling? Because now you really got to see and feel what it's like to be in a war zone, not intellectualize it, but there you were, physical body with the commitment that you're willing to give your life to stand up for what you believe. How did you feel?
Yeah, so I was scared, and I was and I was trusting the people I was with and my own groundedness. So, you know, one of the things, Starhawk actually was one of our trainers. So she had talked to us about grounding and in the face of fear. So here we were, 11 of us, walking into Balata camp, and all of a sudden, Palestinian ambulances were the only vehicles that were allowed out because there was curfew. So a Palestinian ambulance drove past us, and all of a sudden there was machine gun fire in front of the ambulance, in front of us, hitting the road in front of us. And that was one of the few very scary moments that I actually did encounter while I was in Palestine. And there were only a few, actually, and that's one of the things about fear, is that a lot of it is in our imagination. But that was one very scary moment, and in that moment, all of us, somebody reminded us to ground, but all of us kind of together in unison moved over to the side. The ambulance turned around and actually stopped, and we all got into the ambulance, and the 2 drivers, the Palestinian drivers, took us around to another entry into Balata camp. Oh, and the other thing is, it's getting to be dusk, and we knew it was very dangerous to be out after dark. So we needed to get in to some people's houses before much longer. And so we went to this other entry into Balata camp where there was another tank. The ambulance drivers dropped us off, and we walked together kind of in unison with our hands up past the tank in order to get in. And we got past the tank with no problems, got into the village where the people's houses were, and were invited immediately into a couple of the houses where we ended up spending the night. And then we learned more of the story of what had happened, that the soldiers had come in, arrested all the men, so the only people who were in the houses were women, children, and elderly men.
So that whole activity that you went through must have reaffirmed your disdain for the fact that we as Americans were supporting that activity.
Exactly.
It must have made, and to have Starhawk, she's one of my favorite people. In fact, she actually did a training on nonviolence for the Andy Lopez group. I mean, she's just an absolutely wonderful person. And I know that idea of grounding. Okay, so now you got there. Did you stay with the family? I mean, how did that work? What happened then?
So we had to break up into smaller groups, and the first family that invited us in, we had become, at some point we had decided we'd have partners. So the two of us agreed that we would go in with that family, and another two guys with us agreed to go into that house also, and that's where we started. And later, actually, Starhawk and the other woman who was our guide, trainer, leader of this team, ended up coming over to our house too. I'm not sure what was behind their decision, but it might have been the fact that this house still had two men in it that had not gone with when the soldiers came to take all the men out. And the reason was because one of them was a young man who was a little mentally not stable, and he was very frightened, so he hid, and his brother, who was a school psychologist, decided to stay with him. So these two men were in the house basically illegally, because so they were feeling even more frightened than they would normally be. So the family was feeling more frightened than they would normally be feeling, and they felt safer by having some internationals present. So we ended up, actually, they showed us, the power was out when we arrived, so we were in the dark, and with a flashlight they showed us some of the holes in the walls that were bullet holes from what had happened in April. I was there in June, and the women, so there were 4 women in the group, decided that we would sleep downstairs so that if anybody came through the door, we would be the first ones that they would come across. And the 2 men in the group decided to stay upstairs. And that was my first night in Palestine.
Well, you were in a war zone, so you got to feel what it actually felt like, to be a Palestinian person, going through all of this. I mean,
but the difference is that I realized also, yes, I got to get a little glimpse of what it would be like. The difference is that I was choosing to be there, and I was going to be leaving in not too long. And the people who are living there don't have that choice.
What an insight. I mean, when you start thinking about it. And also, it's very, very interesting. One of the things when you talk about choice, I really believe all we need is one rule. We don't hurt each other. We don't kill each other. I mean, that to me is the one law that we should all have. And to recognize that when somebody takes, like in a war zone, shoots a bullet or a bomb, they're really taking away your choice to life. They're making the choice for you, whether you're going to live or die, or whether you're going to be in a harmonious or inharmonious situation.
Or in a situation like in Gaza, where it's like being in a living prison. And, when curfew, even here, the men were kept, they were released. Many of the men that they had arrested that day were released in the middle of the night sometime, but they were not allowed to come back to their homes. And so it was the women and children, and it was curfew for the women and children and the elderly men who were left behind. And so one of the things that we were doing while we were there is we were escorting people who needed to go to the clinic, or anything, who needed to do anything outside of their homes. We would walk with them past the soldiers, and mostly that was the only excuse that they had to get out of their houses, was to go to the clinic. So we did a lot of escorting people to the clinic. There was one moment when some of the men were coming back into the village. I'm not sure why. This is like on day 3 after the soldiers had come. And we were being asked to escort some of the men, and we'd be stopped at every corner, and their registration, they had to carry their registration with them, would be checked. And the soldiers would be on the radio talking with each other. At one point, the 3 men that we were escorting got stopped by the soldiers and asked to stand against the wall with their hands up. And then at that point, as any Palestinian men started walking down the road, the soldiers would put them up against the wall, and it kept them there, not at gunpoint, but they had guns. And language was a little bit of an issue. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but when I was chatting with one of the Palestinian men, I was told not to talk to them. So I was just there, and Starhawk was on the side watching from the side. I was kind of right in the middle between the Israeli soldiers and the men that were lined up against the wall. And that felt so powerful. It's like, because the soldiers really didn't know what to do with these foreigners that were in the way, that were just hanging around. So it was like, it kind of it gave them like a disorienting dilemma. They probably hadn't had a whole lot of training about what to do with these internationals. It felt, when I came back, I had been afraid that I would come back traumatized. Instead, when I came back to the U.S., I felt more alive than I'd ever felt. And I realized when I reflected on it, it was that scene, or just that ability to get in the way of violence, that gave me a feeling of aliveness that I'd never had before. All of our lives, we were bombarded with television news showing us wars and people killing each other, and not knowing how to do anything about that. And all of a sudden, I had a little glimpse of what it was to get in the way for a little while. It's
an amazing story. I know when you stayed with one of the families, that there were children involved. And I know the children did some art and they gave you. So I want to flash a little picture of the art that you brought in, and let's just look at it and give us an idea of, if you can just give us an idea of what were they expressing, do you think?
Yeah, so look in the foreground of this picture, those are tires burning. And that's just one way that I've seen in various places in the world where people do protest. That's one thing that they do. They'll burn tires. Notice the tank. Notice there's a guy shooting a machine gun from the tank, and what is that? A cannonball coming out of the tank, it looks like. And then there's the helicopters dropping missiles in the sky above. There's the children, or the people, the Palestinian people holding a Palestinian flag without any defense. The only defense that existed in Palestine at that time were rocks, were stones that people could throw. The children sometimes would throw stones at tanks.
Well, I'm just amazed at that. I'm looking at that, and I'm just looking, and I'm thinking to myself, that these are young children, and this is what they're living with every single day of their life. I mean, it's just amazing to me. Well, I really appreciate you sharing all this story, and the whole idea of hearing the story and letting you go into such length and depth of it is so people can understand what it really feels like. This is just not a news bite. This is a human being that had an experience. So I'm going to identify us. You're listening to Women's Spaces. I'm going to identify myself now. My name is Elaine B. Holtz. And I am talking with a very dear friend of mine, a new friend by the name of Linda Sartor. And I'm really, really excited about this interview. I mean, I can't believe, it's true. All of a sudden you just get to a point where you don't care anymore. You've just got to do something. And like Linda was talking as we stopped to do the break here, she was talking about how she felt so exhilarated because she actually knew what was happening. It wasn't like a television in front of her. It was actually a life experience, which gave her a feeling of wanting to even do more. So, Linda, let's get into a little bit about the book here, because I think the book is very, very interesting. It's called Turning Fear into Power, One Woman's Journey Confronting the War on Terror. Now, why do you call it that? Why do you say one woman, you're confronting the war on terror? What does that mean to you?
Well, like I said, my heart was tormented by the way that the U.S. responded to the attack of 9/11, and then Bush, as far as I'm concerned, created his war on terror, and the powers that are in place in the countries that are keeping us at war do so by keeping us in fear. So the whole war on terror is all about keeping the people of the world in fear. So I believe that the more each of us can learn to be with our fears and not let them stop us from following our hearts, like I said, I think the more safe and healthy the world will be. So for me, this whole war on terror has been a farce to some extent, I mean, sure, there's things to be afraid of, but we keep the powers that are making the decisions in the world that keep us at war with each other use fear and deliberately develop the power of fear and maintain the culture of fear among the people in order to keep us under control. So my idea is that that I was out confronting the war on terror, and Israel-Palestine was the first place where I went. I went to Iraq shortly after that. It was in March of 2003. No, it was in February of 2003, 1 month before we started bombing in Iraq, that I went to Iraq and joined the Iraq peace teams. And Kathy Kelly was there at that time, and a lot of people from all over the world. Actually, people from all over the world were out protesting Bush's idea of invading Iraq.
Right, we were called a focus group. Remember, we were called a focus group. We're not going to pay attention. In Santa Rosa alone, there was 3,000 people that came out. I mean, it was amazing. And then we did a die-in. And everything that people predicted, that there was going to be a civil war, that there would be total chaos, that women would start losing their rights, everything that people predicted came true. And I remember Laura Bush coming out and saying, we're going in to make sure that the women have rights, and women have lost their rights, and they're losing them more and more and more because of some of the religious doctrine that they have there that I believe was kind of under control before we went in there. So then after you came back from Iraq and Afghanistan, is that when you decided to write the book? When did the book start happening?
So Iraq, it was Palestine and then Iraq, and then I joined the Nonviolent Peace Force, and I was in Sri Lanka for several years, going and coming. And then I was in Iran, and then it wasn't until 2011 or 12 that I ended up going to Afghanistan for the first time. And I've now gone back to Afghanistan once. And I also ended up going to Bahrain. So when I came back from Sri Lanka in 2008, I was encouraged. So from the beginning, in Israel-Palestine, I had an email list. I started keeping an email list of people I wanted to stay in touch with because I know about the nature of fear, that there's a lot more fear at a distance. And I knew that I would know from one moment to the next if I was in a scary situation, and that most of the time I wouldn't be in a scary situation, which was true. But people that hear the news from afar think it's scary all the time and think you're in danger all the time. And so I had all my loved ones and friends back home who I knew I wanted to stay in touch with to reassure them that I was okay. And that's when I started the email list, and then I continued to add people to the email list as different people were hearing about what I was doing. And I just kept sending messages out to my email list whenever I was in another country, especially, and just giving little glimpses of what I was experiencing to people who were getting, who were only getting the major media news to give them a different picture. So one woman on my list, who had been one of my instructors when I got my PhD, kept saying, I hope you're documenting this, in response to my messages. And basically, my documentation was these messages that I was sending out to people. So when I came back from Sri Lanka with the Nonviolent Peace Force, and she said it again, I hope you're documenting this, I asked her if she would be interested in helping me, or interested in co-authoring a book. And she wasn't, but she was interested in supporting me in authoring a book that covered my experiences. So at that point, I only had 3 countries. After that, I went to Iran, Afghanistan, and Bahrain.
So the book actually, because I thought it was journal entries, but it's actually emails that you were writing your friends. So you were expressing everything you were feeling to them, and then you gathered all the information. There's one part in here that kind of, I think, describes you in the book. In the face of these crises, it is so easy to get caught in a sense of hopelessness that there is nothing one individual can do to make any significant difference. And so we do nothing. And that's the fear, we do nothing. In fact, I'm beginning to think that the television, the way they present everything, is really just to get us to be so scared to go over there.
Yes.
And then you continue on. We need to find the courage to take the actions that our hearts are longing to take, even when the odds seem hopeless and overwhelming, and we know we may not see the results within our lifetime. So what you're saying here is, and what your story is exhibiting is that even though you were frightened, the idea of doing something to make the world a better place really took over, and the fear just said, forget it, I'm just going.
Well, no, I wouldn't
Go
say
ahead.
The fear didn't say forget it, but the fear was always there. And but the heart was loudly saying, it doesn't matter, you've got to do this anyway.
Oh, all right, so then,
Not to stop because of the fear.
okay, so what you're saying is because of your heart and because you wanted to do something good, you wanted to be a peacemaker and bring a better picture of the United States. That's what I get the feeling. You wanted to, as a woman, and God, I just love the idea that you were there with Starhawk. I mean, I just think it's amazing. But it was your heart that was driving you, even though the fear even was there, even as you encountered all these things. Well, what has your experience been now that you've written the book? I mean, then how did you get it published? What were some of the steps that you took?
So I started writing the book in 2008, and it came out finally this last spring, 2014. So it took 6 years, and it was draft after draft after draft, getting a lot of feedback and having a lot of support. Having that email list was an incredible amount of support. There's currently about 350 people on that list. And so and I keep in touch, like even when I'm not in another part of the world, I once in a while send a message. So there, yeah, it's not an easy process, and especially not easy for me to write a story about me. It took, the woman who encouraged me to write it, I needed her there to keep encouraging me to stick with it. I made a commitment to myself to work on it at least one day a week, and I pretty well kept that commitment because it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to be writing what felt like I was writing about myself. It's a memoir, basically. But then everybody who knew what I was doing or would read parts of it would give me the feedback. And now, after it actually came, I self-published it and actually got it out, and people were reading it, and I was so frightened. Again, another fear, because I had no idea how it was going to come across. I revealed a lot of my inner self that I'm an introvert. I don't normally talk about myself, and I revealed a lot about my inner process because I wanted people to be inspired to do that, not to do what I did, but to follow their heart and not let fear stop them. And so I was willing to take the chance of being vulnerable, but I didn't expect the feeling I had when it first came out until I started hearing from people who just really want the book to get out to the world, like Esther, who put me in touch with you, because they think the message in the book is really important.
Well, the message, Linda, is that number one, as a woman, you decided to do something. You decided to follow your heart in spite of all your fear. You knew this was the right thing to do, and you did it. And you're still doing it. And then the fear, of course, it's the same thing every time I do a television show. I think, oh my God, what's a person going to think that I'm interviewing, or is it too long? Am I asking the right questions? But you get to the place, I think, where you don't care. You just have to do the work, and the work has to get out there. So tell us a little bit of some of the experiences that you've had. I mean, people are reading it, you're getting feedback. What is some of the feedback that you've been getting, particularly from women?
Oh, well, feeling inspired. One woman went out and started and sold some, or went to a store because she's a jewelry maker, but she hadn't started selling yet. She was inspired by my book and she pushed herself to go present some of her jewelry at a local market and got it accepted. So she was able to get her jewelry, start selling her jewelry. Others are inspired in different ways, but the importance of speaking up and following their hearts seems to be getting across. But also, so this wasn't a woman, but it could have been a woman. One guy told me that he's read a lot of self-help books, and that this was the best self-help book he's ever read. And it's not even meant to be a self-help book, but he got a lot out of it because of the inner process that I show of not knowing and doing anyway, just moving ahead anyway, even though I didn't know that there was something I could do or what it was.
Well, do you think now with this experience that and writing the book and getting it out, now when you do your vision quest, you're going to have even a lot more, a lot more oomph and a lot more feeling and have overcome because you've overcome so many fears yourself?
People, again, when I guide vision quests, I tell a bit of this story because I really think that the vision quest experience had a lot to do with the direction that I went in my life after 9/11. And so when we start preparing people to do the vision quest, I have this story to tell, and I think it inspires them. And people, sometimes from inside myself, it's harder to see the changes that I've gone through. Like I said, I know I came back from Palestine feeling more alive than I ever had felt before. And I did recognize that. But other people in my life see changes in me, like in my confidence level or whatever, that I don't necessarily see from inside out.
Well, I think I just listening to your story and just being here with you has been a real delightful experience for me, and it's also inspired me. Mm-hmm. I realize, my fears, that I'm just, I feel like I can face them. I mean, when you went into a war zone, I have fears that do not bring me to a war zone, and I'm going to think about that whenever I want to do something. Well, now I'm going to test your fear again. What I do at the end of the show is I have my guests. You've been looking at me so diligently. I just love it. I have my guests just go look at this camera, and any message, you've given a lot of messages, but just take 30 seconds. Remember, this is Women's Spaces. A lot of young women watch the show. So anything, just like you're a wonderful person from the heart, anything from your heart, just take 30 seconds, Linda.
Well, the last line in my book is something like, to be you, and don't let fear get in your way.
Say that again.
To be you. That I actually had my car license in the previous car I had was to be you, and I thought that's so perfect. To be you, and don't let fear get in the way.
Well, Linda Sartor, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on Women's Spaces and sharing your delightful story. And I want to have you back again because I want to talk a little bit more about a little bit about what is going on in Palestine and Israel, and see that, any other information that we can glean out of you that you might be able to share. And one last thing before we say goodbye. How do they get a hold of your book? I mean, is there a website? We cannot give phone numbers, but is there a website or somewhere how they can get a hold of it?
There's 3 books locally, 3 book places where one could buy it locally. One is Community Market in Sebastopol, one is Many Rivers in Sebastopol, and one is Local Marketplace in downtown Santa Rosa. But also it can be ordered through Amazon. But better, people can go to their local bookstores and ask for it by name, and be sure you use my last name because there's actually another book with the same title, different subtitle. So the name of the book is Turning Fear into Power, and it's by Linda Sartor, Sartor. The subtitle is One Woman's Journey Confronting the War on Terror. So be sure you order the right one, but any bookstore can order it, and that's the best way to do it.
Well, Linda Sartor, thank you so much for being on Women's Spaces. I really appreciate it. And at the end, I have credits at the end. Before you leave, give me the list of where we can go and get the book. Anyway, to my viewers and listeners, let me tell you something. This has been an amazing show for me. I know a lot of people think, oh, Elaine has a lot of self-confidence, but you know something? I don't have as much self-confidence as I heard today. I mean, to think that Linda's heart was so upset that she had to do something, that she was willing to go. And then as her journey, what was so interesting to me as I was listening to the story, to think that people in Palestine were actually able to get around a little bit because they had some international people there. I mean, because I guess they were just a little bit nervous. They didn't want to do anything too warlike while they were there. You know, it's a lot to think about, folks. There's just so much to think about. And one of the things to think about really hard is this idea of fear. What are we afraid of? We are so afraid of each other. I notice when I stand in a supermarket line, everybody just stares. Nobody talks to each other. They don't say anything. And it's just amazing when all of a sudden someone will say, hey, how was your day? Usually it's me, and get into some conversation. And people are just desperate to talk to each other, to integrate with each other, to be with one another, and to start looking at our differences. You know, people ask me, who are you, Elaine? And I say, there's two things I answer. I say, first of all, I'm a human being. That we all can relate to. Secondly, I'm a woman. The rest of the stuff, make up whatever you want. All I know is I'm a human being and I'm a woman. And because I'm a woman, and because I gave birth to a child, and because as a woman, this is what the Great Spirit, the higher power, charged me with, I feel responsible for all the children. And I really encourage you, all of my listeners and all of my viewers out there, forget the politics. Forget the politics. Learn and listen and watch what's happening. That's what needs to stop. We sent a man to the moon. We have electronics now. I cannot believe when I was in Germany and I was introduced to my nephew's girlfriend. I thought he was going to bring her in from the next room when he pulled up his laptop, and there she was talking to me, and there was a little picture on the side, and there I was. I could see my picture. I could actually see myself talking to her. It reminded me when I was a kid, they had Dick Tracy. You'd look at it, and all of a sudden this whatever would talk to him. Look at what we've done. Look what we've invented. I mean, we've practically annihilated polio. I mean, all the different things that we have done on this planet that we can be so proud of. But one of the things that we should be ultimately ashamed of, and that is the idea of war. War is not healthy for anybody, and war is an insult. War should not happen. I mean, who gives anybody the right to make a decision to kill somebody else? And justifies it. That's what kills me. It justifies it. They give you a reason, and then everybody agrees with that reason, and everybody forgets, wait a minute, we're talking about killing somebody. I mean, think about it, dropping a plane, putting a plane up in the air and dropping bombs. The plane was developed after watching birds fly. Nature gave us this gift so we could fly. And what do? We turn it into a war machine. I mean, it's disgraceful. I don't know what other word to use. So as human beings, as women, as men, we have to ask ourselves one question. Are we a country, a nation of life, or are we a nation of death? I want to be a nation of life. And the way we stop that is, number one, we stop all wars. The next thing is we start looking at health care for everybody. Then we make sure everybody's educated, has a good job, has water, air. I mean, there's so many things that need to be done. And here we are killing each other. And not only are we killing each other, but we're also killing the planet while we're doing the other things. I mean, it doesn't, if someone would just email me at Elaine@Women's Spaces, tell me your logic. Tell me how you justify all this stuff. I'm really curious. And one of the things, I'm speaking out very, very clearly right now. And I'll tell you one of the things that Linda did for me. She made me not be afraid to speak out. Because what's the worst thing that could happen? They're going to take my life? Well, guess what? My life's going to end anyway. I might as well let it end standing up for what I believe. And I believe that all the children, I don't care what color, I don't care what religion, I don't care what size, I don't care what neighborhood they live in. All the children of the world deserve to live in a world of peace. Anyway, this is Elaine B. Holtz with Women's Spaces saying thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to being with you the next time.
The woman in your life will do what she must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you. simple way to touch, to make you whole.